Hi, it's Katrina! From multi-million-dollar airplanes that were retired before they were delivered to billions of dollars squandered on programs that produce virtually nothing, here are 8 very expensive military mistakes. Number 8. Blue Devil Airship. During the war in Afghanistan, a massive reconnaissance airship called the Blue Devil was built for the United States Air Force. The airship's primary purpose was to capture and process data from 12 onboard sensors and then deliver the data to ground troops. The Blue Devil was equipped with advanced spy technology, including listening devices, day and night video cameras, communications devices, and an airborne surveillance system capable of monitoring several square miles at any given time. An onboard computer would be used to analyze and store the data, which would be transmitted to ground analysts and accessible to troops. The 370-foot-long blimp was 1.4 million cubic feet in volume and was designed to fly at an altitude of up to 4 miles for up to a week at a time. With the final price tag of $211 million, the airship's first flight was planned for October 14, 2011. But, as you probably guessed from the title of this video, she never flew, and those hundreds of millions of dollars went straight down the drain. Instead of becoming airborne, the Blue Devil was stuck in a dirty hangar in North Carolina, inflated with helium and tethered to the ground by metal cables weighing several tons. After encountering some issues, meeting the FAA's flight requirements, the blimp's maiden flight was pushed back to April 2012. Technical issues such as overweight tail fins and unexpectedly complex avionics systems contributed to the delay. In June of that year, after tensions arose between the Air Force and MAV-6, the company that built the airship, regarding its projected costs, the project was called off entirely. After 5 years were spent bringing the vision of the biggest airship in over half a century to fruition, the Blue Devil was placed in storage and slated to be dismantled. In its order to MAV-6 to discontinue work on the blimp, the Air Force cited unacceptable performance and recurring failures to meet minimum operating standards as reasons for the cessation of the project. The Inspector General of the Air Force determined in 2013 that the awarding of contracts for the Blue Devil's surveillance system was mismanaged by Air Force personnel. Furthermore, a former Air Force general was banned in 2014 from doing business with the Air Force because he allegedly tried to keep the program going after it was ended. Number 7. Expeditionary Fighting Vehicle. Also known as the Advanced Amphibious Assault Vehicle, the Expeditionary Fighting Vehicle, or EFV, was an amphibious assault vehicle designed for the U.S. Marine Corps by General Dynamics during the 1990s and 2000s. The 38-ton swimming tank was essentially meant to be a landing craft that converted into an assault vehicle and was intended to replace the outdated AAV-7A1, which had entered service in 1972. Conceived in the late 1980s, the envisioned machine would carry 17 Marines and would seamlessly transition from the water to the beach without stopping in the path of enemy fire. It was scheduled to be deployed in 2015 with 3 times the water speed, twice the armor, and superior firepower compared to its predecessor. But the program was canceled in January 2011 by Secretary of Defense Robert Gates amid intensifying political and economic pressures for the military to make drastic budget cutbacks. Having already cost $3 billion, the projected final cost of the project had been estimated at $15 billion. Gates' controversial decision to end the program arguably represented a shift in warfighting strategy. He had previously questioned the practicality of amphibious assault vehicles, given the capability of modern adversaries to fire missiles at tanks and ships from miles away. The official reasons for canceling the project, however, were its excessive cost growth and the poor reliability demonstrated during operational testing. In the meantime, the Marines resolved to rely on the use of their aging fleet of AAVs, while the Pentagon worked to come up with a more affordable and sustainable replacement to the canceled EFV. Number 6. Alenia C-27J Spartan. The future seemed promising for this C-27J Spartan twin turboprop in 2007 when it was chosen for the U.S. military's $600 million Joint Cargo Aircraft program. In September 2008, the United States received its first C-27J. In total, the Air Force ordered 38 of the aircraft at a unit cost of around $32 million per plane. In January 26, 2012, after less than 4 years in service and with some not even off the production line, the Department of Defense announced that it was retiring all 38 of the military's C-27Js. Included among the reasons for this decision were the excessive intra-heater airlift capacity and, surprise, surprise, budgetary pressures. When the first planned retirement date of October 1, 2013 arrived, 12 C-27Js were taken out of service and shipped to the Boneyard at Davis-Monthan Air Force Base in Arizona. The retirement of the aircraft came so shortly after it was initially put into use, the Air Force hadn't yet received all of the C-27Js that they had ordered, which would immediately go to the Boneyard once they came in. At the time, the government was in its second week of a shutdown as Congress struggled to agree on a plan for the upcoming fiscal year. Sound familiar? Deja vu right now, anyone? Luckily, there is some good news. Eventually, the planes were removed from the Boneyard, where they'd been kept in near-active condition and put into use by the U.S. Coast Guard and the U.S. Special Operations Command. Number 5. Agent Orange. You've probably heard of Agent Orange, the highly toxic herbicide that was used by the U.S. military during the Vietnam War to destroy crops and forest cover in territory occupied by the Viet Cong and North Vietnamese Army. Between 1961 and 1971, over 20 million gallons of various dangerous chemicals were sprayed across 4.5 million acres in Vietnam, Cambodia, and Laos in a U.S. program codenamed Operation Ranch Hand. Out of those herbicides, Agent Orange, which came in several different mixtures and contained the deadly chemical dioxin, was the most commonly used, totaling 13 out of the 20 million gallons of lethal substances used throughout Operation Ranch Hand. Agent Orange is perhaps best known for the serious health issues it caused among the Vietnamese people and U.S. servicemen and their families, including rashes, serious psychological and neurological problems, birth defects, liver problems, and cancer. It's also linked to type 2 diabetes, nerve disorders, heat disease, and immune system dysfunction, just to name a few. These health issues are perpetuated by the environmental damage it caused. For more than 4 decades since the war ended, the use of Agent Orange and its subsequent consequences have remained controversial and widely debated topics. During the 80s, a Supreme Court lawsuit filed by some 300 veterans against various chemical companies that were involved in the manufacturing of Agent Orange, including Monsanto, was settled for around $240 million. In 1991, certain health problems suffered by countless other veterans became the government's financial responsibility and were covered as the result of the Agent Orange Act, signed into law by President George H.W. Bush. The ill effects of the chemical are even more evident in Vietnam. Vietnam and the U.S. have gone back and forth for decades trying to reach a reasonable agreement regarding the American government's financial obligations toward things like healthcare and the necessary massive cleanups for ridding the environment of the chemical, but the cost of the damage is estimated at around $300 million. In 2012, the U.S. government finally started assisting in post-war cleanup efforts. Number 4. 1968 Thule Air Base Crash. On January 21, 1968, an American B-52 bomber carrying 4 nuclear bombs crashed into the sea near northwestern Greenland, one of the most frigid places on Earth. Human error was to blame for the crash. A crew member had stuffed seat cushions near a heating vent, causing a fire. When the smoke became unbearably thick, the crew had no choice but to eject, and the plane crashed 700 miles above the Arctic Circle near America's Thule Air Base. Denmark, once a strong ally of the United States, was less than pleased with the incident. By carrying the powerful hydrogen bombs through Greenland's airspace, the U.S. was in violation of Denmark's nuclear-free zone policy, which had been in effect since 1957. Moreover, the fjord the plane had crashed into now contained radioactive contamination. The warheads had broken open during the accident, resulting in the release of their radioactive contents. Luckily, they didn't detonate. Denmark demanded that the debris and anything around it that had been contaminated, including ice, be gathered and relocated to American territory. The cleanup effort, codenamed Operation Crested Ice, ensued and was ultimately deemed a success, despite one nuclear warhead having never been found. This helped heal relations between the U.S. and Denmark. In addition to covering the cost of the cleanup, the American government ended up compensating Danish citizens who had assisted in the effort and were later diagnosed with cancer. Number 3. Bikini Atoll Contamination. Between 1946 and 1958, the U.S. detonated 23 nuclear devices on Bikini Atoll, one of the Marshall Islands. Native residents of the island were relocated to nearby Rongerik Atoll and Kili Island. The scientists and military authorities running the experiments at the time promised the displaced residents that they'd be able to return home after the nuclear tests were finished. Things didn't go as planned. When the islands the residents had been relocated to proved to be unfit to sustain life, starvation ensued and ongoing aid was required. Meanwhile, the soil and water at Bikini Atoll were contaminated by the nuclear tests, rendering the island uninhabitable. A neighboring atoll, Rongelap, was evacuated in the early years of testing after being engulfed in fallout. In the early 1970s, the American government erroneously deemed Bikini Atoll fit for habitation and permitted the residents to return, but they had to leave again in 1978 after food grown in the contaminated soil caused them to ingest high levels of radiation. Eventually, the U.S. compensated the islanders and their descendants to the tune of $125 million for their displacement and for the nuclear damage. Then, in 1988, the Marshall Islands Nuclear Claims Tribunal was established, awarding $2 billion in land damage and personal injury claims that resulted from the nuclear tests. The fund ran out in 2012, and the U.S. has since declined to provide further assistance, despite being called on by the UN to help more. Bikini remains uninhabitable, and much of the local culture has been lost, and the experiments carried out there by the U.S. are directly to blame. Number 2. Contaminated water at Camp Lejeune. From 1953 to 1987, tap water at Marine Corps Base Camp Lejeune was heavily contaminated with toxic chemicals. Soldiers and families living here drank and bathed in the poisonous water, which contained concentrations of chemicals ranging from 240 to 3,400 times the permitted safety levels. Over 70 toxins were discovered in the water, including degreaser, benzene, vinyl chloride, and dry cleaning solvent. The improper disposal of chemical waste that once occurred regularly on the base is thought to be a main cause of the contamination. In 2012, the Janie Ensminger Act was signed into law by then-President Barack Obama, providing for the medical care of people affected by the contamination. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention determined in 2014 that the risks for multiple diseases, including liver cancer, kidney cancer, and ALS, were significantly increased by exposure to the water. To date, over 850 former residents of Camp Lejeune have filed claims against the military totaling nearly $4 billion. The true extent of the damage will never be known, since people who once lived at the base are spread out all over the world, but up to 1 million people are thought to have been poisoned. The Environmental Protection Agency placed Camp Lejeune and 236 miles of North Carolina's coastal land on its list of Superfund sites in 1989. The base remains a Superfund site to this day. Number 1. Future Combat Systems. Launched in 2003, Future Combat Systems, or FCS, was a modernization program for the U.S. Army. Well, it was supposed to be. The program's vision included a battlefield network of unprecedented speed and flexibility, along with new brigades equipped with high-tech manned and unmanned vehicles. This supposedly ambitious and far-reaching program ended in 2009, however. The vehicle development portion of the project was canceled, and the rest of it would be incorporated into the Army's next modernization program. To many, the abandonment of FCS symbolized a major failure that ultimately had the opposite of the intended effect, and set the Army back a generation in terms of progress. FCS was just one of several projects of its type between 1995 and 2009 that proved fruitless at the time of their cancellation. These programs totaled some $32 billion altogether, with FCS accounting for $18 billion of the wasted money. The next time you splurge a little, just remember, it could be much worse. Hope I didn't scare you too much. Remember to subscribe, and I'll see you next time. Bye!